Hi everyone, editing Troy here. So I realized two things as I'm editing this here. Number one, I forgot to record the the tutorial. I forgot to record the tutorial for today's episode. So I will be releasing that as a standalone video. The tutorial will be a tutorial on the braided cast on. So I'm going to show you how to do it two different ways. One's kind of a cheat, and the other one is the actual way of doing the braided cast on. Yeah, so stay tuned for that next week. And I also forgot to mention that I finally released the winter rose pattern that I'd been kept saying that I was going to release, for like a year and a half at this point. It is released, it's available in Ravelry, and you can find the link down in the description down below. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hi everyone, I'm Troy. I'm the creative behind Fox and Oak Designs here, based in Prince Edward Island, and this is the Worst of Fibre podcast. Hello. Clearly I'm going to talk about my Raga sweater here later on today, but first what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about twist and how commercial spinning is done, especially in our operation at Belfast Mini Mills. And I also want to address a few things that was said by one of our friends, Nancy Wheeler, from Knit Sit Happy, about some criticisms that she has of our yarn, which it may surprise you that I agree with her some places and disagree with her in others. But first, what I wanted to talk about, and I'm actually going to put this down now that I've joined my yarn, is twist. So I know that I've talked about twist in previous podcasts, and generally what it means. When I'm speaking of twist today, I am going to be speaking specifically on how more commercial style spinning operations work. This is not about hand spinning. There are, of course, a lot of overlap, but what I'm going to be speaking about is specifically for how machine spinning is done. So twist is a very, very important part of yarn construction. It is what determines the strength, the durability, the bias that might be in the knitting after the fact, how rope-like it feels like, how lofty it is. It affects just about everything, right? So generally speaking, when we're talking about the construction of yarn, twist refers to not only the twist that is being spun into the single, but it refers to how much twist is plying back in the opposite direction. And dependent on what the final result of yarn is, you're going to be changing how much twist you're putting into spinning the single and how much twist you're going to be putting into the ply. Generally speaking, you are going to be putting more twist into the single when you are doing a plied yarn, so a 2-ply, a 3-ply, a 4-ply. Typically, you're going to put more twist into it. So that way the thread, when it's going through the machines later, has enough strength in order to stand up to being plied in the opposite direction. It's the friction of those individual strands that are holding the yarn together, holding the single together in this instance. And the reason why you're putting a little bit more twist than you really need is because when you go and ply the yarn later, you are going to be plying, taking, in a case of a 2-ply, like the 2-ply that I'm working with today, you're taking 2 strands and you're going to spin them in the opposite direction. This is exactly, like, up to this point, all of these things is exactly the same as hand spinning. So you're going to be putting more twist than you need in the single, and then you're going to be relaxing some of that twist while applying it together. And that the yarn naturally wants to do that. And the difference between doing it by hand and doing it on a machine is that when you're doing it by hand, you are spinning a single strand at a time, and then when you're plying your strands together, you are plying one finished yarn together. So you are able to make changes on the fly. If there's a thick spot, you can fix that. If you find that, a couple minutes into spinning that you're not putting enough twist into it, then you can just fix that on the fly. And the opposite, if you're putting too much twist, you can change that. As you're plying your yarn together, you can add and remove twist based on how tightly it's been spun, whereas a machine, typically speaking, isn't that exact. And the reason for that is because the machine is usually doing multiple strands. So our machines that we have at Belfast Mini Mills, they can do between 4 and 12 strands at a time. And then when you're plying them, you're plying 4 individual finished pieces of yarn at the same time. And the machines are also able to just consistently spin exactly like the action of drafting, the action of adding twist. It is exactly the same no matter what, which is a benefit because then we can just line up, 12 strands in our case for our 12 spindle spinner, and spin every individual roving exactly the same way. The problem comes is that if those rovings are not perfectly even, which we use draw frames to even out our roving the best that we can, if there's thick and thin spots in that roving, then there's going to be thick and thin spots in the finished yarn. The way the machine works is that it's taking, a length of roving and it's stretching it out by, 15 times or 20 times. So if the roving is this thick, it's going to stretch that out 15 times in length and it's going to thin. But if you've got thick and thin spots, it doesn't matter. The machine doesn't see that. It's just going to take any thick and thin spots and stretch it out 15 times. That thick and thin doesn't usually happen with our machines because, generally speaking, we have ways to mitigate that. So we make sure that when it's being carded evenly. We put it through the draw frame so the inconsistencies of a single roving through the carder gets divided by 4 because we're blending 4 strands from the carder together. That's how we make our tweeds, by the way. There's way to mitigate that, and it comes out as a fairly consistent yarn. I say fairly consistent because the part of me that needs to be like super honest but also a little hypercritical knows that it's not perfect. And if you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty, when you look at even large company spun yarn, so like an Amtech spun yarn or a Rowan, which I've got a couple examples here actually, there is going to be some thick and thin even in their yarns. It's just that because of how they spin their yarn, they are more aggressively pin drafting their yarn to make it a worsted spun as opposed to a woolen spun like what we do, or a semi-woolen spun, semi-worsted like what we do at Belfast Mini Mills. So I've got a couple examples here of a few different things. I wish I had a 3-ply from Rowan, but I don't. I only have the 4-ply. But I've got a couple different things here. So the first one I'm going to show you is the yarn that I'm working with. This is Knit Picks Pallette. This is a 2-ply Peruvian Highland wool. And I'll just wrap a couple strands around my fingers there. So you can kind of see the construction there. It is 2 strands that are twisted together. And in this case, it's actually fairly loosely twisted. So you might be wondering, what does a lightly twisted yarn do for you? So if you don't put a lot of twist into a yarn, like from start to finish, we'll just assume that the ratios, yeah, maybe I should explain that. The other thing that our machines, and machines in general, it is a boon and it is a curse in the same sense, is that when we are adding twist to the yarn, we are adding it across the board. Different types of fiber require different amount of twists in order to get the same kind of loftiness if you're looking for a very uniform product across all your fiber types. So if you want your alpaca to have the same bounce as a wool has, A, you're not going to get there, but B, you could try putting a lot more twist in it at the beginning and at the end. And so when you're spinning, if you're putting a lot of twist into your single, you're probably going to be putting more twist into your plying to counteract that amount of twist. Those ratios is exactly how we are spinning and plying our yarn. When we're working with the same fiber type, we tend to just default to those numbers. And when it comes to the same fiber types, it's pretty typical for us to default to those same numbers. 9 times out of 10, it's perfectly fine. So like this superwash that I dyed blue is going to act the same way as a superwash that I dyed red. An undyed superwash is going to act differently than a dyed superwash. And I'm speaking superwash because we do a lot of superwash. I'm not going to give you our formula of how we do our yarn, and the formula is, with mechanical spinning, we have to use ratios in order to determine like the end result of the yarn. So if the If we're putting a lot of twist into it, we've got like a formula. I'm not going to share with you what that formula is because it's proprietary to our yarn. But we have a formula to determine like how much twist we're putting into our yarn, and we actually have a way of measuring that by the. You can measure it by twists per meter, or you can measure it by twists per inch. And we actually have a dial that we can dial that in up and down as we see fit. And then when we apply it all together, we have a formula based on the end product of yarn that we are going to be applying back at a certain ratio. So, for example, if we're doing a 2-ply lace weight, we're going to be spinning at quite a high twist per inch rate. Could we use twist per inch? We'll be spinning at quite a high rate for the single, and then we're going to be twisting back at a higher ratio than we would for a 3-ply, for example, or a 4-ply, okay? So you may be asking yourself, what does twist do for your yarn? Yes, it keeps it together, there's friction holding the strands together, but like twist is twist is twist, right? Not quite. So what twist does is, depending on how much twist there is, it's going to change the characteristics of the final yarn. So you could take the very same fibers and spin it a couple of different ways and get different yarns out of it that are better and worse for different purposes. So typically speaking, a yarn that has less twist will have a little bit more drape. It will have a little bit more loftiness because the fibers are not so tightly twisted that it's squishing all the airs out of it. And then how it's prepared before it's even spun and twisted, whether it's a woolen spun or a worsted spun, that's going to affect the yarn as well. And it's going to affect how the twist is going to affect it. So if you're working a worsted type yarn, so that means that the fiber preparation before is that all the fibers have been combed in the same direction, and when it's spun, all the air is being squeezed out of the fibers, and more typically, not always, but typically more twist is being put into the strand. That causes the fiber to be more durable. It causes the fibers to be more tightly spun. It also tends to cause the finished product to be like a harder, generally more durable, but a harder kind of yarn. If you felt two yarns from the same material and they're just spun at different rates, the one that is spun less tightly is going to feel softer. It's going to feel perhaps limper. It's going to have better drape, is usually how we phrase it in this world. But it is going to be limper. It's not going to be as springy, and it's going to be a little bit softer and loftier. And if you put more twist into the same fiber, it tends to be perhaps a little bit harder. You could frame it as a little bit harder, but it's more durable. Depending on the fiber type, if there is an inherent sheen to the fiber, so like a merino sometimes has a bit of a sheen, a mohair has a lot of sheen. If the fiber type if it's higher twisted and all those fibers are laying closer together, that sheen is more easily seen. So I have a couple of examples of different kinds of yarn spun here. The two that I'm going to show you most closely are these two green ones. So one of these we spin at Belfast Mini Mills, and the other one is a ball of lichen and lace yarn. I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm reasonably certain that this yarn is the superwash base from Amtex. That is the company that we are buying our superwash from when we make yarn at Belfast Mini Mills. We just buy it in the roving, split it up, card it, dye it, do all of that, and then we spin it. Where they also will sell superwash. Amtex will also sell blanks to indie dyers. I have not talked to Megan about this. I don't know if Lichen and Lace uses their yarn, but this is so similar to Amtex superwash merino. I'm just going to make the assumption that it is. And then this is a superwash wool that we spin at Belfast Mini Mills. It's the very same superwash and the very same nylon that's in this. This has no nylon, but the superwash and the nylon that we use in our superwash lines and in our sock yarn is the very same. Not only is the color a little different, but if you look closely at these balls of yarn, which I'm going to bring them closer to the screen, I don't know how well that's picking up, but you'll notice that the green one, the dark green one, has a little bit more sheen to it. You can see there's a little bit shininess to the yarn, where the light green one is a little bit fuzzier. Okay? So there's two reasons for the difference in texture. One is that this is worsted spun, and this is like woolen spun. So the true difference between a worsted spun and a woolen spun is that it's the fiber preparation. The fiber before it's spun is, so this is worsted spun. So that means that the roving before, like the pencil roving before it was spun, has been combed. So those fibers are not only lying in the same direction, but they've been combed together to have them lie flatter against one another. And then when it's spun, the air is being pressed out of that roving before the twist is going into it. So those fibers lay against one another much more closely. And MTEX also has a tendency to steam their rovings under tension. So that way the crimp that is naturally in the wool stretches out a little bit. So when Belfast Mini Mills, takes that very same roving and dye it, or even just get hot water on it, that crimp returns, and it starts acting more like a typical merino as opposed to a superwash merino. Our ball, this ball here of Belfast Mini Mills, this is woolen spun. So we card the fibers. So the fibers are generally lined up, but there's a lot more air in the fibers. We do put it through a pin drafting machine to even out the rovings. And that does have the effect of brushing the fibers, but it's not to the same extent as the worsted spun here. So we're somewhere between a woolen and worsted spun, technically speaking, with Belfast Mini Mills, but we are closer to the woolen side of things. You'll also notice really close, I will take a picture of this and put up here. I'll see if I can't make a really good delineation, but if you were to compare these two strands side by side, you'll notice that the darker strand seems to have more of, like, if this is the strand, there is the twist that's there. It has a more exaggerated angle from vertical than our superwash. Ours is closer to natural. It's also spun the opposite way. We'll get into that. You'll notice that there's that angle, and that angle is really showing you how much twist is in the yarn. There is much more twist into this yarn than we put into our lines. Yeah, so Belfast Mini Mills, we, truth be told, don't put a lot of twist in our yarn. And the reason why we have less twist in our yarn is because it was decided a number of years ago that we wanted to have really soft yarn. That was going to be the number one thing about our yarn. And one of the ways that you can make sure that your yarn is soft is just by not putting much twist into it. It also causes it to drape nicely. And through the years, we've learned that our yarn is really nice for color work. It's really nice for shawls and different things like that. It's great for sweaters. It's pretty hard wearing. It does pill, but all yarn will pill. We also spin our yarn in the opposite direction compared to other commercials. So if you look at the picture that's up on the screen, you'll notice that the slants of the Lichen and Lace green yarn and the superwash, the Island Collection fingering that I got on the screen, the slants are going in different directions. That's because we spin our yarn in opposite directions. Typically speaking, commercial yarn is spun Z, and then plied S. So that way when you are knitting with it, specifically Western style knitting, so that's continental style, that's English style where you're throwing your yarn, as you knit with it, your yarn is actually going to tighten up. And that, for many people, is what they've come to expect, right? The benefits of the yarn tightening up a little bit as you're knitting with it is that you have less stitch splitting, and the final product has a little bit more squish to it than it would in the ball. Since our yarn is spun in the opposite direction, it actually is going to untwist a little bit while you're knitting with it. So that can cause exaggerated stitch splitting, and it gets more exaggerated if you have to pull, if you're the type of knitter that will pull your work out and then reknit it and pull it back out and reknit it. It's going to be taking a little bit more twist out of the yarn every time that you do that, making it easier and easier to twist your stitch. What that will do is it's going to cause your yarn to have more drape. It's going to be really soft, and it can be frustrating if you're splitting your stitch constantly, which, you know, our yarn, you will split your stitch. The reason why we don't change how we spin it is that we've actually gotten pretty well known for spinning our yarn spinning S, plying Z, having Z plied yarn for crocheters. Crocheters tend to really like our yarn because how the yarn twists and untwists is in the opposite direction as knitting. So if you're using a Z-plied yarn, like our yarn here, and you're a crocheter, instead of your yarn constantly untwisting as you're crocheting, ours will tighten up a little bit and be a little bit squishier. And the opposite is true with the S-plied yarn, is that it's going to untwist as you're crocheting with it. So the direction of twist is really just a preferential thing. It was brought to my attention, it was brought to my attention there about a week and a half ago that when Nancy Wheeler, the creative behind Knit Sip Happy, and she is the designer of the Freddy Beach socks that we've talked about here on the podcast, the Ravishing socks that I plan to do here in the future, she did a review of Belfast Mini Mills sock yarn, specifically the Sockadelic colorway and I believe Iris Tweed. She made a lovely pair of socks, and she had some criticisms about our yarn. I don't want this to turn into a drama thing, so I'm just addressing some of the criticisms and wanted to speak about it. So I want to start off by the things that she liked about our yarn. She did say that it was lovely and soft, and it felt great while she's working with them. The socks feel great, and she felt that the yarn wasn't pleasurable to knit with because she was having a lot of trouble splitting her stitches, and she felt that it was thick and thin in some spots and some underspun in others. I'd have to see the skein specifically to see exactly what she means by thick and thin, because every ball of yarn, no matter if it's spun by us, spun by hand spinners, spun by big commercial yarn, there is going to be inconsistencies, and perhaps she received a ball that shouldn't have made it past our quality assurance. And perhaps it's just that she's used to a particular type of yarn, like an indie spun yarn. So like something from Belfast Mini Mills, something from, Felice and Harmony, from Legacy Lane. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here. It's just, I'm just saying, giving some examples. It's just going to be less consistent than a commercially spun yarn where each ball is being spun from a 20-pound bump of yarn, each single spun for thousands of kilometers out of a single bump, where our smaller batches are going to be a little bit more inconsistent. I don't want to say inconsistent because it's not that like we got huge, thick and thin designer art yarns going here. It's just that some of the strands are going to be thicker and thinner than spots. I'll show up here on the screen. I'm going to take a really close-up picture of both the commercially spun and then the Belfast Mini Mills spun. You will see that in our yarn here that the individual singles, they are a little thick and thin, but once it's knit up, like you can't see the difference in that kind of inconsistency. Like it's not enough to actually reflect it in your work. And if you were watching her podcast, and I found when I was watching her podcast on my computer screen here, which is a high-def screen, I looked out, I blew it up to the full screen and I looked at her socks and she had it close to the screen. It didn't look like there was a lot of thick and thin in her socks. They looked fairly consistent. So I'd have to see her, the ball that she was using in particular, before we get any further. But she did say that she was talking about splitting stitches. And that is partially because A, we don't put a lot of twist in our yarn, and B, as you continue to knit and rip it out, if not saying that she was even ripping out, but as you knit with our yarn, since there's not a lot of twist in it and it's plied Z, it's going to untwist as you work with it. So it could very well be that what was just happening is just like, this is how our yarn is spun, right? I'm a little, hurt's probably not the right word, but I'm a little, I hesitate to say disappointed because it hurts so much more to say you're when someone's disappointed in you. I'm nonplussed, is how I'll put it, that she said that she'll never buy the yarn again. I've used our yarn in a number of our socks. I'm wearing our yarn now. I have another hoodie that I've had for years that I love. I know that the yarn can hold up to it as long as it's taken care of. Like, you should be taking care of all of your knitted items. Yeah, so I am a little nonplussed that she said she would never buy our yarn again. Or I think what she said is, I have to say, I don't think I'll buy this yarn again. I wrote it down. I didn't want to misquote her here. It may influence some of her viewers not to become patrons of our shop. And I would love for her customers to try our yarn out for themselves, so that way they can see, because you know, we've got a lot of ride or die patrons of our shop. Our yarn is not going to be perfect for every instance. You cannot say that about any individual yarn, that it's not the perfect yarn for every person. It's not the perfect yarn for every instance. What our yarn is, yeah, our yarn has its uses. There are things that I will use our yarn for. Yeah, the Belfast Mini Mill yarn has its uses. It's a great place for you to go find like exotic blends, different things you've never seen before, and a really forgiving yarn. And a really forgiving yarn if you're a beginner knitter or crocheter, or like a really forgiving yarn if you're a beginner, and if you're a crocheter, I think you're really going to love our yarn. I mentioned earlier that I was going to point out where I agreed with her. I agree with her that our yarn has less twist than I would like to put into it. And you'll find over the next little while that some of the yarns, like our sock yarn, where there really should be more twist in it, will have more twist. Unfortunately, I can't just, you know, take a new color and just be like, this is the new twist, because I still have a number of different colors from that particular line, that if someone wanted to do color work with it, then there's going to be a difference in texture, a difference in bounce, a difference in draping between those. So I'm going to have to generally slowly increase the twist. I don't want anybody to go to her podcast and rip into her or anything like that. Please don't. I know that a number of her viewers view this podcast, and some of my viewers go to her, and then vice versa. There's a lot of overlap in our two communities, and I don't want anybody to think that this is like me calling her out, or that that there's going to be any bad blood between us. I am still going to be doing the Ravishing socks. I am going to make a small change to my Maker's Dozen. Instead of me doing the Ravishing socks with Sea Witch by Nerds with Needles, I'm going to reserve that yarn for a nether sock pattern. I'm going to do the Ravishing socks with the Belfast Mini Mills yarn that I've spun, because I want to show that I stand behind the product that I make. I think it's an affordable product, and it stands the test of time, and I really want to showcase it in this particular pattern, the Ravishing Socks by Nancy Wheeler, because it is a beautiful pattern. I love it, and I want everybody to love her patterns and our yarn in her patterns. Now, all that being said, I have some yarn here to contrast and compare. So here I've got a Knit Picks 2-ply. This is the Peruvian... I have a Knit Picks 2-ply. This is Knit Picks Pallette. It's a fingering weight 2-ply in Peruvian wool. This is a lightly twisted. This is a lightly twisted. Are you going to focus on that? Or are you going to focus on me? How about you focus on this? Yeah. Okay, well, I'll just take pictures of it. So this is a lightly twisted 2-ply, and it is great for color work. It has a lot of drape to it, and it has a lovely stretch in all directions with it, and it's very squishy. I really like this yarn, and I'm using it in my Raga sweater, which I'll talk more about this in just a minute. No. I'm having some focusing issues. It doesn't want to focus on the things I put in front of the camera. That's okay. Picture's up on the screen. So this is a lightly twisted 3-ply fingering weight. I'm using this for a cardigan, so it's going to have some lovely drape, especially with the balloon sleeves of those Sylphide jacket that I've been working on. Fantastic. This is Lichen and Lace Superwash. This is a tightly twisted 3-ply yarn. A tightly twisted yarn is superior to a lower twist yarn when it comes to sock yarn, simply because that higher twist, as I mentioned before, does add a little bit more durability to it. So a bit of a bigger cut. I had to go get my laundry. So I am back working at the Raga sweater by Violet McQuade, and I'll show you what it looks like now. So I've picked up the second sleeve. I've started the second sleeve. So that's what it looks like right now. When I block this, I'm going to have to block it in such a way that I'm stretching the material out a little bit more than what it wants to sit like right now, because I think it actually turned out to be about an inch too thin. I'm scared that like this is going to end up being like 42 inches and my chest is closer to 44. I don't mind it stretching over my chest a little bit, but that means it's also going to stretch over my love handles in a way that I may not be super keen on. But I have tried it on, and it does currently hug my love handles a little bit too much. I'm going to, when I do my final block, I'm going to purposefully like block it in such a way that I can kind of like get the fiber to relax in a way that it's going to be a little bit more flattering when I do decide to wear it. And yeah, we'll see if that fixes it. If not, then I'll just lay off the chips for a little while. Yeah, I really, really love it. It's coming together really quite nicely. And yeah, I don't have anything bad to say about this pattern that I haven't already said. The only issue that I really have with the pattern at this point is that the charts, some of the colors that they chose for the chart, they're super close to one another. And I know that's a limitation of what colors are available to be printed on this particular pamphlet style chart from Spindrift. But some notes, really good notes, referring back to previous parts of the pattern. It hasn't been difficult to jump right back into it. This is done in Knit Picks Pallette, which is a Highland Peruvian wool. And the colors are on your screen in order from darkest to lightest, and the top three are green, the middle, the next three are purple, and the last one is a gray color that you can see right there and right down here. So I have pulled it out. I am planning on, working on this really, like going gung-ho on this one, because I want to finish this for my finished objects for not next week, but from 2 weeks from now for that particular podcast. And I don't know how close I am to doing that. Like it's just a sleeve. But I do know that this sleeve took me quite some time to get through. But I was also at a point where I didn't want to work on the sweater anymore. And I'm back working on it and I'm enjoying it again. So I'm hoping that that enjoyment that I'm having knitting this is back. I'll be able to knit sooner, because I was able to, I had picked up the stitches and I had worked a couple stitches, but like last night I sat working on it for a couple of hours. And I got, looks to be about 10 rows done. So I just need to really get at it. So that's what my big focus is for the next little while. Yeah. So I'm trucking right along with this one. I am using more of the nitty-gritty details. I am using Knitter's Pride 16-inch circular needles for the sleeve right now, and I will be going down to my Royale, Knit Picks Royale 3.25s. I'm using 3.25s right now, I think. Is that what I'm doing? Yes, 3.25s. My 3.25s here, I'll be going down to the, my double pointed needles towards the end of the sleeve, and then this corrugated rib is done in a 2.75 millimeters. So I will be going down to my 2.75 9-inch circulars to finish off this sleeve. I did it with my DPNs before, mostly because I couldn't find my 9-inch circular, but I have found one of the two pairs that I have, and I'll just be trucking along using that for the bottom of the sleeve. So this shouldn't take too long. The way that the decreases on here work, you really have to look for them. I'm just going to fold this in such a way that you can see the decreases. They're not increases. You can kind of see, like, I put it up to the screen, but it's, for whatever reason, my phone's not focusing when I put things up. I'll take a picture of this later as well, but you can see how it's angling in here. Like, it's just a very, in some ways, it's kind of a messy sort of dealie, because they just tell you to decrease. They're not giving you any information on how to decrease, so I'm just kind of decreasing in pattern and doing my best. So it's kind of showing like hidden. You really need to look to see that there are decreases here, because if I turn this, a little bit of a degree around. Like you can't really see the decreases. I moved them here. So it's hard to see, but if you know what you're looking for, you can see them. And I just have so many ends to cut. Oh, I should show you the float prawn. It's been a while since I've shown the floats of this sweater. So I'll try to do this in such a way. So these are the floats. So that's the floats of the inside. And then these are the floats to the side that I was changing my colors here. I see on the screen, it's a little hard to tell. But you can see, like, those are my floats. I've been carrying my floats and weaving in my ends as I go. I do have a couple that I missed, so there's one that I have to weave in. So all I need to do once I'm ready to block this is I'm going to block it, and then I'm going to trim my ends. And after it's been blocked, I'm just going to go and just go boop, boop, boop. Done. Just trims. It's just a few that I'll have to sew in. So there's one here that I need to sew in, and then around the edging here, I need to sew. Around the edging here, I need to sew in. I have to trim some of this extra that I forgot to decrease out, and then tack that back, like so. And yeah, I'm getting close. I'm getting close. Realistically speaking, I don't think I'm going to finish it in 2 weeks, but I'm going to do my damnedest. So as far as my Maker's Dozens going, I have finished the Freddy Beach socks from Nancy Wheeler in Lichen and Lace's Pumpkin from her sock base. And this is project number 2. This is what I planned for my second project. And I've got a few others. You can refer back to episode 1 of season 2 of the Worst of Fibre podcast for some of the other things. For a detailed version of them. I'll put them here up on the screen though. I have a new one that I'm going to be adding. So Linda, I'm not going to say her full name because I know that she has some reservations about information being spread on the internet. But Linda suggested that what I could do with a sock yarn is do a Musselburgh hat. Musselburgh? By Ysolda Teague. I'm going to say Musselburgh. I'm going to assume that. It's a fingering weight hat. And like it's a fairly simple looking knit, but it looks like it works best with a really fine yarn. So actually I'm going to be taking a ball of my own. Well, give me a second, I'll grab it. So this is the skein. So this is a 2-ply fingering that I spun using a spinning braid from Good Fibration. This is the color Gift Wrap, or was it Gift Wrap or wrapping paper? If I were a good spinner, I would have kept the card, but I lost it in the move. I might be wrapping paper. So this was a blend, or it is still a blend of BFL and silk. And this was in her Happy Accidents pile. So this was just a mistake skein. I don't know what's wrong with it. I think it's beautiful. It is perhaps on the darker end. Maybe that's all that was wrong with it. And it is just a simple 2-ply fingering that I had done using my QE3. And I think this would be a great pattern to do with the Musselburgh, because the Musselburgh, it is written for like a 3mm, but since this is a little bit finer than a fingering weight, this is about 550 yards, if I remember correctly. Again, I would take notes if I were a good spinner, but I'm not. New Year's resolutions. Since this is a little bit finer, I think I'll just use a finer needle and then just make a larger size than what I would really need, and hopefully, I won't get too far before I actually check, but hopefully that will work out, because it is just a fairly simple knit hat. There doesn't seem to be a lot of design elements going on other than like the attractive shaping. So I'm hoping that this will allow this yarn to really play and let the fractal spin like really shine on that. So thank you, Linda, so much for that suggestion. Please, anybody else who has any other suggestions, I've read through a number of them, but this one really struck a chord with me, so I'm very excited about this. When it comes to the lace pattern, I have not completely made my mind on this, but I think this will be a good backup. So with the skein of yarn that I've done with for the lace weight pattern, you know what? I'm just going to grab it. I'm just going to grab it. Yeah. So another big jump cut. So this is the skein that I had dyed earlier in the week. I'm going to have to really sit down and, or I'm going to actually have to find some time to like really like break this down and put into a ball. Because I've tried once since putting together, and unfortunately my yarn swift that I have isn't big enough for this skein, since the nitty naughty that I have is a 2 meter nitty naughty, and my yarn swift, I think it taps out at 1.8 meters. So I think one of the skein winders at work is bigger than mine. So I'm going to I hope that's the case, so that way I can get this into a ball. Otherwise, I'm going to have to take an evening and put this back around a chair like this one and roll it by hand into a ball. But yeah, so I wanted to show you this because I think what I'm going to be doing is the Submerge shawl. I'll put the details down below. I haven't asked Olga for her permission to use her pictures here, so I'm not going to put them up, but link down in the description. And it is a lace shawl of it looks like a phoenix, but it is specifically its own thing. Submerge is a mystical bird from Persian and Iranian folklore. And this has been on my back burner for a little while. And I think this yarn would look lovely as that particular shawl. It's just that this shawl doesn't fit the exact vibe I was looking for this. So if you have any suggestions that's a little bit more butterfly or any fairy wing-esque more than the Simurg or Simurg, anyway, anything that's a little bit more, mushroomy or more fairy wings than this here in the next couple weeks before I actually start this project, because I'm going to start this one in March. If I don't have a better suggestion, this is what I'm going to be making out of it, and I think that's going to look really friggin' good on my back wall here. I can't wait. Yeah, so this is, if you've missed my last episode I talked about like the process of spinning this. This is a skein of yarn Polwarth and silk from a braid that I purchased from Good Fibrations. They're in New Brunswick, and the color is Drink the Kool-aid. I spun this intending it to be a Fractal spun 2-ply, but then I decided Fractal spun 2-ply lace weight, but then I decided that the single that I was spinning was the thickness that I wanted, so I just spun the second half of the braid onto the same bobbin. So this is the entire braid split down the middle like a fractal would be, but just spun tip to tail, those two pieces. So it's not a fractal spun, it is just a single ply. I also splurged a little bit, and I got myself a set of Gu shorties. So if you've watched the podcast from before, you know that Simone loves her set. I've only ever heard good things about these needles. So it is just a really simple little case here. Like I can throw this entire set into my knitting. It comes with needle enders, it comes with a couple stitch markers that are really cute, some pins so that way you can screw the needle on. It also comes with a little needle gauge, which is pretty fun. So you can do your 3-inch gauge. It's not 4 inches, but 3 inches, or a 70, or I guess that goes up all the way up to 80 millimeter ruler on this side. I should show you the side that has the numbers on it. Yeah, so that way you always have that available. So that's fun. It's got like a little, it reminds me like of a hip sack or a fanny pack almost. It's not the same material. This feels like cotton. And then inside, is that everything? Yeah. Inside, there's the twist cables. You get 3 twist cables, a 5-inch, a 6-inch, and an 8-inch. So that's, what is it? 15 centimeters, 17 centimeters, and 20 centimeters. Oh, it does say 13, 15, 20 centimeters on the cable here. And this is their red twist cables. So they're the ones that have no memory to them. So that way you don't have if you sit on them or if you bend them somewhere, they won't get a kink in them. And then, whoop, I opened it upside down. It has like a little pocket on the inside, and your arranged needles. Oh, I missed the pocket. So the fun thing about this is that there's actually like an additional pocket right there, so you can put your cables in here, or your stitch enders in there. It also comes with a packet, so I'm just going to keep it in there. But you've got two different tip lengths. So these ones are the short tips. The ones in the back are the longer tips. So that way you have all those different lengths, and they come in 2 millimeters all the way to 3.25. I'm really excited about this set. It was a little pricey. Chow Goose tend to be. But with this set, I've basically have short circulars from 2 millimeters all the way up to 3.25. And then the needles that we have at Belfast Mini Mills, the short tips and the like the interchangeables, they start at 3.5 and they go up to 8 in those kits. So between this kit and the other kit, I've got every size I could need, all the way up to an 8 millimeter. And since I don't do a lot of chunky knitting, I probably won't need much bigger than that. I have a 9 millimeter that I bought extra, and we do sell 10s, 12s, and 15s at work. But I've completed my needle set now. I might still go upgrade my I have knit picks is what's actually in my collection, but they're basically exactly the same as the Knit of Pride that we sell at Belfast Mini Mills. I might upgrade those up to the Chow Goo later on in life when, you know, I've worked through all the varnish and off all of the wood needles, and I've worked the nickel plating off of the metal needles. I might upgrade to Chow Goo for those ones, but for now, I think I'm just going to sit on my set behind me and then this set. So I've got all the circulars that I could need. I've been eyeing this for probably 2 years at this point, so I'm very excited to have this. And the first pair of socks that I'm going to be doing with these is the Ravishing socks by Nancy Wheeler. I can't wait. Yeah, so I think that's all I have for us today. Next week I'll be back with talking more about the Lace Masterclass. Since truth be told, I'm not going to have this finished for the Finished Object podcast. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about lace work, wedding ring shawl, and how I'm going to modify this pattern, the Simurg shawl, to be fingering weight, being a wedding ring shawl simply just by using bigger needles. And I'll give you more history on the wedding ring shawls and how it was all done way back in the day. So if you still think I'm the worsted, I have to do I have to do ratings. Today I'm going to rate this podcast 2 out of 2 hand spun skeins from Good Fibrations. Link down below if you want to see Liz's store. She's got some. Last week she had a sale going on, so I don't know how much is in her store right now, but keep checking back week after week. I'm sure you'll find something lovely. And there's also, I'll put a link down in the description for Belfast Mini Mills spinning section if you want to spin from a pencil roving as opposed to a braid, or from a bat instead of a braid, as we do have pencil rovings and bats available. Yeah, if you think I'm still the worsted, comment down below, share with your friends, like the video. If you subscribe to the channel, make sure you hit the little notification bell so that way you can see when I upload on a bi-weekly or weekly if you're looking for the tutorials as well schedule. I'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye, guys.